Hey, good day, everyone, and welcome into the Power Grid, the Footballguys.com podcast, special edition of the Audible, special video podcast as well. I am your host, Cecil Lammy, joined by the best and brightest minds in DFS and Footballguys.com, including Jeff Pasquino, Austin Lee, John Lee, Devin Knotts, and special guest David Dodds, who, David, we all have to congratulate you on your big day yesterday.
It was a big day. I mean, I ended up taking third in the big $25 GPP and played that same roster a few other places. So, yeah, I ended up winning about $24,000.
Yeah, it's what we call a good holiday, that's for sure. And as we go through these games, of course, it's no bye weeks this week, but it's like we do because we don't have to worry about what happened with the Thanksgiving game. So let's jump right in and get to our top stories. Again, we'll get to Vegas. We'll go through all the position-by-position analysis that you want to know about. And first up, the Patriots at the Jets. And, John, I'm going to start with you this week on this game. It seems like we're not going to have any Rob Gronkowski, so Martellus Bennett, who was disappointing last week, how does he play in this week? Looks like Tom Brady's good to go in this one. And the Jets, you pick on them through the air, not necessarily on the ground. So what does that mean for fantasy owners who want to play LeGarrette Blount? Of course, we have Deion Lewis in this conversation as well. Lots to look forward to in this AFC East matchup.
Yeah, this is definitely a week you want to be looking at Tom Brady. He's very expensive, and I think that for that reason he'll likely be contrarian, especially because he was on the injury report up until he's still on the injury report today with the limited practice, and they're giving some typical Belichick comments out of camp about whether he's going to be ready. I think he's going to be fine. And they're going against the Jets defense that's really good on the ground, allowing less than 4 yards per carry, top 10 DVOA rush defense, but has been decimated through the air. And Brady, despite the fact that he won't have Gronkowski here, he should be fine with Edelman, who was, it's worth noting, he was limited in practice this week, but all signs point to him playing on Sunday. He'll also have Chris Hogan back after a missed week. And then adding Deion Lewis into the mix, I think that really makes this offense much more dynamic because he can do so much and line up from so many different spots. A smaller version, Le'Veon Bell light, if you will. I think that this is a really great spot for him, for Brady, that is, and that's the way I'd be doing it. I would be quite a bit of action in on him in GPPs. On the other side of the ball, I think you're really going to have some issues going with Matt Forte this week. He's been basically eliminated from the passing game, and the game script does not set up well for him. Bilal Powell has really usurped any role that Forte had in the passing game there. And Brandon Marshall should be shadowed by Malcolm Butler, who's the fourth best cornerback in the league by Pro Football Focus. And so if you're going to look on the other side of the ball, I think the guy there is probably Quincy Enunwa. He's about $2,000 cheaper on both of the major sites. And if you look at his numbers, they're not too bad. He's only averaging 2 less targets per game. He's actually averaging a higher yards per reception than Brandon Marshall, and he's got more touchdowns than him on the season. So I think he's a good value play in GPP formats if you want to maybe load up on this game with a lot of Patriots and maybe counter that with some Quincy Enunwa garbage fantasy production.
Devin, we're going to you next because I want to talk about the Giants at Cleveland, and normally it's start everyone against Cleveland. Well, there's an interesting tight end there with the Giants and Will Tye. It seems like last year when we saw Rashad Jennings kind of do that late season surge, even though we've heard a lot of talk about Paul Perkins, we haven't seen the production from the rookie from UCLA, so that means a little bit more from Rashad Jennings as we're going forward here in Week 12. Yes, Odell Beckham Jr., yes, Eli Manning, but anyone else in a perhaps robust day for the Giants against the Browns?
Yeah, I think you really have to look at all the Giants. In particular, you mentioned Will Tye, and that's a guy that I like quite a bit. So the Browns are the worst defense against tight ends. Their front seven is probably the worst in football. They can't stop. They can't stop anybody. Joe Hayden is playing. He's playing okay. I mean, he shut down a couple of receivers over the last couple of weeks. So there may be a little bit of hesitation with Odell Beckham. just because of the way that he's priced. But and they may not need to throw to him as much as a normal week because the Browns they're just not an NFL team. I mean, they're like a AAA team. If you had in terms of baseball, they're on the fringe of being a professional team, but they're not quite there. So Rashad Jennings, sure. I mean, worst front seven in football. So if they get up on a lead, they'll just pound the ball and run it. Really, any Giant is in play here. Regarding Cleveland, it's tough. I just don't trust them. I've watched every single game so far this year, and we never know when it's a prior week. We never know when Corey Coleman's going to return back to the form that he was at early in the season. They can't run the ball because they lost Joel Bitonio early and just are averaging less than 2 yards per carry almost every week. It's like this team is a disaster. So I can't trust any of the Browns, but I think all of the Giants are in play with Ty, Jennings, back a little bit of Beckham. He's probably more of a GPP play, but I'll defer to John Lee on when it's an Odell Beckham week.
There's a reason why, Devin, you always cringe when I mention the Browns. You didn't mention Sterling Shepard there.
Shepard's another guy. I mean, playing out of the slot, they have Hayden, but the rest of the corners are bad. So Shepard's a guy who's sneaky. He's not. We haven't seen a huge Sterling Shepard week. He's shown glimpses of it, but I think that he's as much in play as the rest of the Giants. You name a player on the Giants, and they are in play. I mean, it's really that simple.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about an AFC North battle. Pasquino, you're up because I want to talk to you about Dennis Pitta, of course, your man, Dennis Pitta there with Baltimore. And it's interesting with Cincinnati and how they're going to respond. No A.J. Green, no Gio Bernard. Is it a big day for Costco, Jeremy Hill? What does it mean for the rest of that offense? A little Tyler Boyd action, something. I know Brandon LaFell's been a bit limited in practice this week. And if you get points for drops, well, then Brandon LaFell's your guy. But how does that reflect on Andy Dalton? On the flip side of that, Cincinnati's defense. I mean, if Trevor Simeon's lighting them up, of course, Joe Flacco could, perhaps even with Pitta, or other assets, Smith, Wallace, etc. And, of course, that backfield, which is a 50-50 split, basically, based on the snaps between Dixon and West. What are your thoughts on Baltimore and Cincinnati, Pasquino?
I think Cincinnati's in a really bad spot here. I think Baltimore really needs the divisional win. And this is the right time for them to match up against the Bengals, who are just completely banged up, as you mentioned. Lost their number one wide receiver, lost your 1A running back. Eifert is probably the guy they're going to go to, but Baltimore's very good against tight end. So it's going to be a long day, I think, for the Bengals. And I think that on the flip side, Flacco can do pretty much almost what he wants because he's got so many mixed weapons. Nobody's an A-plus target, but they're all valuable. I think that Pitta could find the end zone for the first time this year because the Bengals are a bottom 5 team against tight ends. But they mix the ball up so much that, Flacco just finds the open man. Either it's Steve Smith, Mike Wallace, Kamar Aiken, the guys out of the backfield. So it's tough to pick. I mean, you don't want to go naked Flacco because he doesn't get 2 or 3 touchdowns a week. But I think this is a game that if you're going to go for a PPR league, I'd go Steve Smith. But other than that, I think most of the other ones are GPP flyers because it's so unpredictable whoever the Flacco's going to find each week.
Well, Austin, let's talk to you next about Tennessee at Chicago. And I know that tricky John Fox and how he's trying to keep everything clandestine out there. It just doesn't work. We know that it's likely to be Matt Barkley. We know there's no Alshon Jeffrey. We know there's no Zach Miller. I mean, it's an out-and-out disaster. And what does that mean for Jordan Howard? Maybe the one reliable asset you could look to from the Bears now seems less reliable. On the flip side of that, with Tennessee, it could be big for Rashard Matthews, big for Tajay Sharp, Marcus Mariota. We already know what DeMarco Murray's going to do in this one. So what are your thoughts here on the Tennessee side? And Chicago, is it completely avoid everyone at all costs?
Yeah, Chicago's a dumpster fire, and I'm not playing anybody on that team this week. Tennessee is I think it's the usual suspects for Tennessee, but their implied team total is a little lower and perhaps it could be in other matchups. So I don't know that I'm going gaga for any of these Titans in cash games, but I think there's a lot of opportunities in GPP to flip over to these guys like DeMarco Murray, like Mariota, or I'd go Rashard Matthews in the receiving core if you're going to do that, and of course Delaney Walker. I don't really have any surprise picks there. I think it's mostly going to be Walker, Murray, and Mariota if you're going to play the Titans.
Well, Dodds, we got to wrap up the top stories with you, and I know Aaron Rodgers wants us to relax, but I can't, and I don't think Packers fans should. It's kind of disaster time. They're on the road. They're against an aggressive Philadelphia defense. We know how things haven't looked the same for Green Bay. Jordy Nelson has been sprung. That's awesome for his fantasy owners, but what does this mean for Rodgers? We know they're not running the ball well. Randall Cobb being banged up, Devontae Adams getting more targets. Just interesting times for Green Bay. And again, that aggressive Philadelphia defense. And on the flip side for them, where it seems like you could do whatever you want to against Green Bay, even a team that they were tougher against the run. And then you saw Rob Kelly kind of break their spirit in last week's contest. What about this week? Because Philadelphia has their own running back woes with Ryan Matthews banged up. Darren Sproles banged up as well. Wendell Smallwood, a rookie who's run small. It's not just the name, but it's kind of his rushing style as well. Is that a GPP consideration? Again, it seems like there could be a lot of points for both teams here, but who, where, and why?
Yeah, Vegas likes this game. The good news, it's on a Monday slate, so for a lot of us to play the main slate, we won't have to really deal with this game. It's pretty interesting, though, because I'm with you. It just seems like everybody's banged up. Now, Green Bay can't stop anybody. So, I mean, that kind of implies a high total just because Green Bay probably will be playing catch-up football, which is what they've essentially done the last 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, that defense is just decimated. I mean, they have literally no one left. So you look at Philadelphia, and it's like exactly with Ryan Matthews out, you've got to think they're going to throw the ball. I mean, at that point, you're probably looking at a guy like Jordan Matthews as a solid play. But it's just interesting. I mean, I just don't know how these teams are going to get their points. I mean, I kind of look at it, and it's like there aren't really great players playing in this that aren't banged up. I mean, Philly's got a pretty good defense. Philly's favored in this game at home. I don't really see the 47. My game predictor didn't like this game to be anything like that. Then I look at how bad that Green Bay defense is, and it's like, I don't know. I mean, some of those receivers are probably going to bust some things deep in Philly. Maybe there's a pick six. I mean, maybe Philadelphia defense is in play. So this is a game I don't really have a real good feel for, and I'm probably avoiding it. And the good news is because it's Monday, I can avoid it pretty easily on the main slate.
Well, let's get to Vegas. And Austin, you get to start us off here in Vegas. No big favorites this week. So what are you taking away from what Vegas is telling us?
Yeah, we've got 5 teams with an implied total under 19 points. So there's a lot of teams you can avoid here. We mentioned the Chicago dumpster fire. I want no part of Kansas City or San Francisco either. They're both in that low category. And I'll have very little exposure to Cleveland and Cincinnati. I've got maybe one play for each team, but for the most part, I'm avoiding all 5 of those teams with really low implied team totals.
Devin, what about you? Week 12, what's Vegas saying to you?
Yeah, I think I agree. I agree wholeheartedly with Austin on those. You really have to pick your spots, and I'm kind of against David here. I think that Vegas knows something in that Green Bay Philadelphia game where on the surface it doesn't look like it's 47, but there's a reason that they must see something that pushes it to 47. So I kind of like the Eagles in this game, surprisingly. Rob Kelly looked very, very good against Green Bay last week, and then he didn't look so good this week. So I think that the running game is in play. I think that Jordan Matthews is in play. I think that a lot of the Eagles I play on that Monday night slate will be on my roster. The other one that I like is New Orleans against the Rams. So that New Orleans is at home. They're projected to score right around 25 or 26 points. This is a Rams team that they've looked good defensively, but so it's a little bit surprising that New Orleans is projected to score that many points. and they're going to be a team that I'm going to be looking at for GPPs because I think a lot of people are going to look at the Rams' total stats and their defense has been good and they have Aaron Donald. But at the same time, when I'm looking at Vegas, I look at things that surprise me, and that was one that surprised me.
Yeah, I wonder what Jeff Fisher's going to say when they actually go 7-9 or worse, because that's some 7-9 BS. Pasquino, you've always got your eye on Vegas. What's it saying for Week 12?
I'll comment on the Eagles game because it's getting a lot of talk here. And, I'm probably going to be avoiding it. But I think a lot of what's going to go down here is that Caleb Sturgis, he's leading the league, or he's one of the top field goal attempters in the league. And yes, I
mentioned
kickers earlier.
Every week it's a little earlier. I mean, pretty soon it'll be, dude, let's start with the kickers.
You're asking where the points are coming from. You're asking where the points are coming from. Okay. So, but keep in mind the Eagles are 5-0 at home, and that's or 4-0 at home. That's part of the reason why they're favored here. But for most of it, I am avoiding that game. The two games that I'm looking at the Atlanta-Arizona game. It's got a 50-point total. I think a lot of people are going to be steering away from Arizona because they haven't looked so good, but Atlanta's looked terrible on defense. They get up a lot of points. I think there's some recency bias because they were just on a bye. So I'm actually looking towards Carson Palmer and GBPs and seeing that, putting him in with David Johnson and Larry Fitzgerald just to foreshadow a stack I'm looking at. I think it's going to be very low owned, and that's a high total, and Arizona's going to score some points in that game. They have to keep pace. The other, I like Tennessee as well, and I think that there's a couple of games. I like that they're all very close. I do like Miami to put up a lot of points in San Francisco, but again, there's a lot of defenses in play. The interesting picks are going to be the defenses this week, I think.
Well, for all of us that have known you for about a decade, Pasquino, don't ever change. John, you're up. You're going to talk about Vegas, and I have a feeling if we break down Arizona, we'll have a chance to talk about David Johnson and expectations there. You get points for lollipops, then Carson Palmer's your guy.
Yeah, well, I think that game is interesting. So going last here, I'm gonna kind of pick and choose and reiterate some of the things that have been said already about Vegas this week. Number one, there's a lot of injuries. I think this week may have been the most injuries that I can remember all season. We did the Roto Grinder show. Austin and I did the Roto Grinder show on Wednesday night. And we must have spent a third of the show talking about injuries. And that's really affected the team totals this week because I don't remember there being such a preponderance of low-scoring teams. And so that likely is going to affect also just the general targets that you're shooting for on FanDuel and DraftKings in terms of total points for cash games and GPPs this weekend. So what you should be doing is looking at maybe some of those games like the Chicago Bears. I agree with Austin. It's a complete dumpster fire, but there are 3 receivers there who are out. And I added it up before the show. 19.6 targets per game have to be redistributed if Matt Barkley throws as much as Jay Cutler. I don't think that's going to happen, but if we say it's 75%, there are 15 targets there that need to be redistributed elsewhere. And, maybe a guy like Cam Meredith comes in play for GPPs. And so you need to be thinking that way leading into this weekend, because I think there probably will be some goodness to be had on a team like the Bengals when A.J. Green is out and maybe Tyler Boyd steps up and gets some of those additional targets without Gio Bernard stealing some as well. So be looking for those sleepers on teams where especially in both of those cases, the game script sets up well for the passing game. So somebody's going to have to catch the ball, and especially on a site like DraftKings where you're getting full PPR, you need to be thinking about taking a chance on those guys in GPP formats.
Well, and Boyd at Pitt had something that I always called old man game. Like, he's not going to outrun you. He's not really going to out-physical you, but he can cut a rug. He can run a good route. Dodge, you got to wrap us up in Vegas, man. What do you got?
Yeah, as far as those extra receivers out of Chicago, it's probably about 9 picks for Barkley. I watched a lot of him playing at USC, so not a fan. Vegas is showing me some things. So you've got the Tennessee-Chicago, which opened up as a pick'em game and now is completely flipped based on all the injuries, and now Tennessee's a 5.5-point favorite and a low total 42. Probably a game I'm avoiding, but it definitely setting up much more to be a DeMarco Murray type game. Vegas shows me that. The Cincinnati-Baltimore game, 40.5. I mean, it's funny. There's 10 games that are between 44 and like 49, 50 points. They're all around the same this week, which makes for, I think, just a really good GBP, or even if you're going to play cash games, just kind of a mixture of lineups. Like, I don't think playing one lineup this week and trying to ram it all through is the right approach, because a lot of these games are around the same thing, same points. Kansas City, Denver, another horrible game, 39.5 points. I'm probably avoiding that completely. No one really stands out. And the one that really stands out for me is the Seattle Tampa Bay, which is a 45 game, and Seattle's favored by 6. Well, my game predictor liked that game about 3 points higher. So I'm kind of shocked by that, because I actually think it's a situation where Seattle's defense on the road never is good. So Tampa Bay's at home. They've been willing to sling it a lot. I think that game might be more of the shootout than people are thinking it's going to be. Even if Seattle wins by a lot of points, I just think Tampa Bay is going to have a lot of offense as well. So that's probably the game I'm targeting for GPP play, is the Seattle Tampa Bay game.
And Seattle's defense is banged up. I mean, it seems like free safety Earl Thomas is doubtful in this game.
Yeah, I think he's out now. I think the last
is he listed out now?
Michael Bennett is also out.
And Michael Bennett is out, and Deshaun Sheed is also questionable in this game. Like, they're coming in a little bit nicked up, so I like that call.
Yeah, Thomas's streak of 118 straight NFL games is done. By the way, how often does Jameis Winston go down swinging? Like, everybody knows, all the time.
Because they might throw 4 interceptions, but you can throw the ball.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's awesome to watch as well. And that's a good segue, Dodds, radio professional, as we get into our quarterbacks. And, hell, David, I'll let you fire off from there. We'll talk about Russell Wilson on the flip side of that contest. And, Eli Manning playing the GPP as we discussed what's going on against those Browns. So let's go over quarterbacks, Dodds. Chalk, cash, GPP, or fade. Who you like?
Yeah, I'm locking in hard with Russell Wilson in cash and GPP. He'll be my primary play, probably on virtually every roster. The one I like that's really ridiculous, and I'll kind of maybe save for the stacks, but I think – either LaFell or Boyd on a stack with Dalton, just because no one's going to own it. But in terms of cash, it's pretty much all Russell Wilson. He's at 7,500 on FanDuel and just riding high, playing his very best football. Again, if that defense isn't quite as good, that's the shootout game that I'm targeting. I'll just have a lot of action on Russell Wilson.
All right. Well, Austin, I saw you throw up the green sign when you mentioned Russell Wilson. It sounds like you're on board.
Yeah, I'm on board. And another guy we haven't been talking about is Derek Carr. I really like Oakland in this game against Carolina. Carolina is way stronger against the run than they are against the pass. And Oakland is a 3-point favorite in a game with almost a 50-point total. I like Derek Carr, and Amari Cooper should have a field day in this game. I mean, Carolina is going to be without their defensive quarterback is out here with middle linebacker Luke out. And I just see them reeling on defense. This is going to be a high-scoring game. So I actually like Cam Newton on the other side of the ball too. So both quarterbacks in that game, I think, will have a good outing.
Yeah, expecting a bounce-back game for Krabby as well, who did not much of anything in El Capital. Devin, you could wrap up the QB section for us this time around. What do you got in Week 12?
Yeah, these guys have mentioned a lot of the good ones. Russell Wilson, I think, is a great play. The one under the radar play that I'm looking at is Eli Manning. We mentioned how bad this Browns team is. It is theoretically conceivable that he will throw for 4 touchdowns. If the Browns can give just a little bit of an offense and keep this game close, he should be able to name what yardage and how many touchdowns he throws. Drew Brees is also a decent play. Whenever he's at home, it seems like this year, for whatever reason, he's been under the radar. People have wanted to target other positions, whether it's his price, whether it's whatever it is. He's seemingly under the radar almost every single week. And when he's at home, he's terrific. So those are 2 GPP plays, but I think, as David mentioned, Russell Wilson is the guy for cash.
Well, let's move on to the running back position then. And, John, we're going to start with you. Let's try not to make this quite the MASH unit that it could be, but you've got LaShawn McCoy bothered by that thumb, maybe a little more of Gillislee, although maybe that's not the case as McCoy.
Gillislee's out, I believe.
And Gillislee's out. Okay, Lamar Miller there in a limited participant. What does that mean for his prospects? Yeldon not participating, more of Ivory there, but can you really trust Jacksonville? I mean, just up and down this list. This is where those running back injuries start to come through in season-long leagues. Well, DFS, we're only worried about week to week. What are the running backs looking like for you, John?
This is a week where I think, in at least in cash games, you can avoid a lot of those situations and just spend up and get David Johnson against the Atlanta Falcons. I mean, he's expensive, but this guy is just a consummate fantasy animal, and he does it all. He'll be involved heavily in this game. And Atlanta, I think I looked earlier, they are allowing 16.1 fantasy points to running backs in the receiving game alone per game, which is second worst in the NFL. And here's a guy that is heavily involved in that passing offense. So right. I want all the David Johnson I can fit into my rosters this week. And then, secondarily to him, I think the biggest question entering the weekend, if we're talking about injuries, it's not on the running back, but it's actually on the center. And that's Pouncey at the center position for Miami Dolphins. Ajayi has been an absolute monster when Pouncey's been in there this season. They've given the ball. He's got a dream matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. The question becomes, can they run without Pouncey in that lineup? And Ajayi's going to cost you, I think, $8,400 on FanDuel. So that's a real question that you'll have to ask yourself. But, I mean, he's a guy that we've seen multiple times this year can rack up 200 yards. So against the 49ers, who are basically giving up that many yards on the ground per week, I think you got to take a chance with him. So those are the two guys that I think are going to be the most highly owned folks this weekend. And I'll let some of the other fellas talk about some of these injury situations and how to exploit them.
Well, Pasquino, you're one of those other fellows, and not to paint you in a corner, but there's no kicker talk here. It's only running backs.
I'll work it in somehow.
I know you will.
So I agree with John. David Johnson's got to be your number one. The question really comes back to running back two and how you're constructing your roster. So if you're going to spend up, you can spend up twice and go with Ajayi, or you can go a little bit cheaper and go with like a Rashad Jennings against Cleveland, who fits in nicely, give you a little bit more space to go up at tight end or wide receiver. Or you can look at like Melvin Gordon against Houston, who hasn't been doing too well stopping the running backs, and Gordon's the workhorse back there. You got DeMarco Murray for Tennessee against the Bears. That's another solid option. I think David Johnson and Ajayi are going to be your top two guys, but you have several possibilities at your running back too. And I think as a GPP possibility, you could look at Spencer Ware against Denver, because Denver has been given, if there's any weakness to the Denver defense, it's been to pass catching running backs, and they've given up over 4+ yards to carry.
Well, that's going to be an interesting one on Sunday Night Football. Dodds, I'm going to let you wrap up the running backs. I always want to pick your brain about football. He mentioned Ware on the one side, and you can see that weakness on Denver. I will say this. They are emphasizing Devontae Booker more than ever.
Yeah.
So, and again, GPP, nobody's thinking about Booker. He's been largely a huge disappointment.
That's the one game that Vegas doesn't like at all. I mean, with a really low total, I think both running backs probably will be in play, but a really slowed down pace. I don't really want any part of that. The back that no one's talked about, I think, should definitely be in play is Thomas Rawls, who essentially has just been given the starting lineup all again and is super cheap. I mean, so $7,000 in a game script that Seattle's supposed to win. So where Russell Wilson's underpriced, Thomas Rawls is underpriced. I like playing both Rawls and Russell Wilson and essentially get all that offense for cheap and literally build out the rest of my team. I'm with them. I don't know if David Johnson or Ajayi are the two best play. I mean, which one of those I will match that with. Certainly the numbers say Ajayi. San Francisco's giving up 36.2 fantasy points to running backs per week over the last 4 weeks. That's just nuts. I mean, Pouncey or no Pouncey, I mean, they could just throw any alignment out there and have a shot, I think. So I think I just can't avoid that. I think the field will be on David Johnson. I think I will probably be on Thomas Rawls.
All good points. Let's move on to the wide receiver position. And Devin, you got to start us off in this section. And again, lots of other wide receiver injuries to look to. And we've mentioned a couple of guys, including the AJ Green situation, what to watch out for there. We've been talking a lot about Russell Wilson. Dodds just talked about Thomas Rawls. I want to talk about Doug Baldwin. You talk about a guy that could go off this week. How much do you love Doug Baldwin and any other wide receivers, Devin?
Yeah, we saw this last year where Doug Baldwin got off to a really slow start, and then all of a sudden he starts to come on. So he's in the middle of starting to do that. He's not doing it as much as what he did last year, where it seemed like he had 3 touchdowns every single week. But he's a guy who he's end of the year type player, and this offense is just clicking right now. I mean, he has in the month of November he has 252 yards and 3 touchdowns over those 3 games. So he's a guy who I will be targeting. His price is still under $7,000 on FanDuel. The other guy that I want to talk a little bit about is Julian Edelman. He was limited in practice, but it looks like he will play at just 6,400 on FanDuel. He had 17 targets last week, and Martellus Bennett didn't practice on Thursday. Rob Gronkowski is hurt. We know that the Jets' defense against the run is very strong, but against the pass, they're a little bit susceptible. So I think Edelman is in a prime position to see 15 targets again this week just because they don't have that many people to throw the ball to.
All right, let's talk wide receivers with you then, John. You're up. And again, lots to choose from here, including are we going to trust anything happening in Miami? Maybe as some sleeper play there. Jarvis Landry, limited participant with his shoulder injury. We do see Parker coming on a little bit, so maybe some sneakier plays there. Any thoughts here on these wide receivers this week?
Yeah, so I mean, I think one that we've tangentially touched upon is what's going on there in Oakland this week. I like Amari Cooper quite a bit. His price is quite reasonable for a wide receiver 1. I've been waiting on him to surpass Crabtree for most of the season. I think he's a superior talent. And this week he goes up against Carolina secondary. He'll see Darryl Worley in most of his coverage, and Worley has given up almost 70% of his passes have been allowed to be completed. Quarterback rating when thrown into his coverage is in the neighborhood of about 120. I think this is a great spot for Amari Cooper to do some damage coming off of a bye week. In terms of Miami, I think the Devontae Parker is an interesting call. Parker has 18 targets to Jarvis Landry's 11 over the past 2 weeks, and he's certainly cheaper. But I would say that that's probably GPP specific for me in terms of how to handle that. Outside of that, this week is an interesting week. I think it's tough with all the injuries. I think really what you want to do is to try to navigate some of the injuries we talked about before. And by the time I'm finished with all of my analysis, and certainly check back, my article will be ready sometime Saturday afternoon. I will have one of these guys from Cincinnati or one of these guys from Chicago likely in my cash game rosters, because I want to spend up at running back. And the only way to do that this week is to spend down at wide receiver, at least one of those positions. And so, right now I've got my eyes on Cam Meredith or Tyler Boyd, but that's subject to change based on the research I do as this week comes to a close.
Well, in Austin, you get to wrap us up at wide receivers here. And I'll say this, for a GPP play, and not necessarily a punt play, Pasquino, I'd have to look at his price tag, but Tyreek Hill, when I think of the type of player, and don't think of him as a receiver, because then you'll think of Chris Harris or Aqib Talib shutting him down. Think of him as Tevin Coleman, as a running back with speed. Speed kills at certain places in this Broncos defense. Maybe Freak Hill would be a guy that I'd take a chance on a GPP. But wide receivers for you, Austin, in Week 12. What do you got?
I think if you're going to take a gamble on someone in Kansas City, that's the guy that I would go for. So I like that insight there. There's a couple of cornerback injuries that I think brighten up some spots for receivers. Jimmy Smith is doubtful for Baltimore, so I think you really do have to consider those Cincinnati receivers. I like LaFell on FanDuel, where his pricing is better over there, and Tyler Boyd's pricing is better on DraftKings. Yep. So I would split my exposure to those guys in GPPs. Another injury that is interesting to me is that Brandon Flowers is out for San Diego. I think DeAndre Hopkins is going to see a lot of Casey Hayward in his matchup. Braxton Miller has been getting a lot more reps than Will Fuller in this offense recently. And so I think Braxton Miller could be an interesting min-price GPP dart just based on this matchup and how all the rest of it is sort of unfolding. Those are a couple of guys that are impacted by cornerback injuries.
Look at Devin get excited when you start talking about Braxton Miller. Of course. Of course.
Big game tomorrow.
Yeah, a little bit, kind of. Let's move on to tight ends. And Dodds, let's start with you. And let's just jump off of that Texans talking point there. A couple of weeks ago, we saw a three-headed committee at tight end. Fedorowicz is the big guy. He's the better guy, and he emerged certainly in that game against the Raiders. So we got to talk about him, who's been limited with the shoulder injury. We've got the Gronk thing. How's that affect the Black Unicorn, Martellus Bennett? Lots of interesting tight end plays here.
Yeah, Bennett is just tough because, I mean, he's been banged up all week in practice too. And, you know, injury information out of New England is always tough to come by. That just feels like an Edelman game to me. I'm staying kind of on that track. So I'll probably be avoiding Bennett. I do think Gronk scratches again, even though I think he's really a lot closer. This is a game they probably would love to have him against the Jets, but I think, again, traveling – aren't they traveling, or is that
they are traveling to New York?
Traveling, right? So traveling, I think, is makes the difference. So I think Gronk's probably coming back soon. Again, I hate to beat the same drum, but Jimmy Graham, top of my board. I mean, I'm going to have four Seattle players in my cash games. I'm going to have the quarterback. I'm going to have Thomas Rawls. I'm going to have Jimmy Graham, and I'm going to have Doug Baldwin. And I expect that offense to explode for a whole lot of points, whole lot of touchdowns. Which Russell Wilson's keying all that. So I kind of want all those pieces. If it's going to fail, it's going to fail mightily, so it won't be close. But those are the guys. I like Delaney Walker a lot. Tennessee they seem to be in shootouts every single week. They give up so many points on defense. They're kind of forced to play that game. And Delaney Walker's their real guy. I just don't see Chicago – I don't know what they're going to do. And like John says that, I mean, Chicago has to find a way because Tennessee gives up so many yards that they probably have to find a way to keep that close or do something. But I think no matter what, Delaney Walker would be a huge part of that game on the scoring end coming backwards. If the interceptions come, I'll have a short field. If not, if it turns to be some kind of ping pong game. But I think for the most part, I'll have a lot of exposure to Jimmy Graham this week. All right, Devin, we're going to talk tight ends with you. Who you liking in Week 12?
Yeah, I mentioned before that Will Tye was one of the guys that I was targeting. He's really cheap pretty much everywhere. He's coming off a pretty bad game last time out where he just didn't perform. But I think that, you know, he could be a guy. He could be a guy against that Cleveland defense. Greg Olsen is another guy who I really like, particularly for GPPs. As he's under the radar. Oakland secondary, we know can be picked on, and even though they've been better this year than they have in the past, there's the past couple of years it's always been start your tight ends against Oakland. So Olsen seems to be another guy who just slides under the radar this year for whatever reason, and his ownership will be less than what it otherwise should be. So he has some upside. He has some upside as a potential play.
Well, a recent play, John, is start your tight ends against Seattle. They've allowed 17 catches to tight ends over the last 2 weeks. Cam Brate is there. We've been talking up Jameis Winston as a guy that's going to go down swinging. Also, if we remember, Florida State, he was the number one quarterback in targeting the tight end in college. He loves the tight end. He is Jameis Winston, and he could love Cameron Brate. Fantasy owners could love that, John.
Yeah, the thing about Cameron Brate is he's so touchdown dependent. If we look at his targets, he's had 3, 7, 6, 5, and 3 over the past 5 weeks. That's about average, I would say, for tight ends. But where he's been above average is in scoring touchdowns. Winston's definitely looking to him in the red zone. We've already talked about Seattle's defense being kind of banged up. So I think that Cameron Brate for me was a GPP play. I can't get behind him for cash games. I think that David hit the best tight end this week on the main slate is probably Jimmy Graham. they finally just integrated him the way they should have been using him now for 2 years. And he looks like the Jimmy Graham of New Orleans Saints from a few years ago. He's everywhere. And so I really like him. If you're playing that Monday night slate, I think that Zach Ertz is probably an elite play at tight end this week. He's really cheap, and he goes against the Green Bay defense that has been beaten up pretty good by the tight end position over the past few weeks. I want to say they've given up over 80 yards per game to that position for 3 consecutive weeks. And we've already talked about Nelson Aguilar not being around. So definitely get some overflow action there. So if you're playing that Monday night slate, I think that Zach Ertz would be my number one tight end. Outside of him, I still think is Jimmy Graham.
Well, as we get to this next section, it's defenses and kickers, and I know, Pasquino, you already got the green thing out, but as anyone else, if you want to talk about this section, then you can put up your – look at that. John's putting up a glass of wine there. So there's that. Jeff, let's kick it off with you. Devin will follow you up. Defenses and kickers, Week 12, Pasquino. Lots to like here.
Yeah, I will say if you're going to include the Monday slate, and the only place to do this is FanDuel. It's probably the only place left for kickers. So Sturgis is definitely in play. He's number 2 in the league with field goals attempted and made. So that's probably where a lot of the points are going to come from. As far as kickers to look at, I think Matt Bryant is the question you have to ask if you want to spend up. He's probably the best kicker in the league, no question, but it's going to cost you the most at $5,100. So a couple other guys that are cheaper. Will Lutz is interesting at $4,800, but he's not as consistent. I'm looking more at like McManus at Denver. He got a good shot for a long field goal there. And maybe Gostkowski at $4,800 because New England's going to be putting up some points. I think that's probably the safest mid-range play.
And defensively and kickers, Devin, is it a sneaky play to take New Orleans? Now, not because of their talent, but because of the question marks surrounding a rookie quarterback in Jared Goff, who could turn the ball over a little bit more, and also what people I talked to have said is a banged-up Todd Gurley. We may not be hearing much about it, but he's not himself. So maybe New Orleans, a sneakier play. What are your thoughts, Devin?
Yeah, they've been a lot better against the run recently. I think that they're only – last time I looked, they were 13th in yards allowed, which they started off as one of the worst defenses in the NFL. So, against the rookie quarterback, yeah, I mean, why not, right? Goff didn't look bad, but he looked like a game manager, which to be successful against New Orleans, you really want a guy who's willing to throw the ball deep down the field and take some chances and stretch that defense. Going back to the kicker thing, I think Andrew Franks, particularly if Pouncey misses this game, is a good play. The Dolphins should be able to move the ball, but then inside having a center is important inside the red zone. The other defense that I'm targeting, just to jump back a little bit back and forth, is Tennessee, because Matt Barkley, as David mentioned, he's awful. I mean, he's one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL. And going back to high school, he had a 50% completion percentage. In high school, he had a 50% completion percentage in college at USC. So this is a guy who couldn't dominate his high school or college opponents, and now he's expected to take on NFL level talent. And Tennessee is not a great defense, but they're an NFL defense. And ultimately, I mean, this is a guy who had all the talent in the world around him in high school and college and couldn't perform, and now he has nothing to perform in the NFL. Cameron Meredith's his number 1 receiver, and it's just a really bad situation for the Bears.
Even Sam Bradford points at Matt Barkley and says, at least I'm not him. So, Dodds, let me get this straight, Dodds. You're going to have your 4 Seahawks, and then you're going to have the Titans defense. Am I right?
I'm going New York Giants. I mean, Cleveland gave up 8 sacks last week. I mean, this Cleveland team, everybody talks about how bad they are. The Giants are going to have a field day on defense. So that's pretty much at 4,800 where I'm going. I do like Tennessee. I think New Orleans is a good play. GPP 4,300 if you want to save elsewhere. But I think in cash games I'll have the New York Giants. I think that's a safe play to rack up 4 sacks, probably an interception against Cleveland at a minimum, and probably a fumble recovery. So that's your 8 or 9 points, and then Cleveland might not score. So you always have that possibility.
Well, let's move on to our stack segment of the program here on the Power Grid. And Austin, you get to kick us off with some of your favorite one or two, maybe a few more, favorite stacks of the week, Austin.
Sure. We've already mentioned a couple of the quarterbacks that I really like, so I'm going to move to a couple of other ideas. I think that if you're going to find some differentiation, you can pay up at quarterback this week and stack those guys and have lower ownership than you would ordinarily have. So I think stacking Tom Brady with Edelman or stacking Matt Ryan with Julio Jones, I think those ownerships are going to be especially low, and you're getting a premium guy, a premium stack there. If you go with some of these other stacks, you're going to have to find some serious differentiation elsewhere. But you could pay down at running back in tournaments and stack high on your quarterback receiver combos.
John, let's go to you and talk about your favorite stacks of the week. And I want to ask you about a running back defense stack in Booker and Denver. Any thoughts here?
I think it's a great stack this week. We've already discussed Booker in terms of him being low owned, and no team on the board has a lower team total than Kansas City this week. So definitely that's a stack that's in play. We know that Denver has touchdown upside on defense, so I can totally get behind that call. I'll give you two stacks. I purposely avoided these guys earlier because I wanted to save them from this point in the show. So if you stuck around, good on you. The one stack I really like this week is Carson Palmer throwing to Larry Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald's coming out of the slot. He should avoid Trufant there, and he's got a 6-inch height advantage out of over Atlanta's slot cornerback. So I think that, in this high-scoring back-and-forth game, I think that Fitzgerald could be a guy. Certainly, we know he's a red zone target, and we know that Carson Palmer looks to him quite often. So he's a guy I really like. And if you're playing that Monday night slate, I could really I would advocate a Carson Wentz super stack with Zach Ertz. And believe it or not, I'm gonna recommend one here, DGB, Dorial Green Beckham. Yes. I really think Dorial Green Beckham is in place for a breakout game here. I'm trying to find my notes as I'm talking because I wrote some things down beforehand as I was doing my research. First off, we can all agree this is a terrible Green Bay secondary. And if we look at what Dorial Green Beckham's been up against over his past 5 games where he's had increased playing time, he's gone up against these defenses: Seattle, Atlanta on the outside, so he's going to see Desmond Trufant there. He's gone up against the Giants, who I think have one of the better secondaries in the league, Dallas, which doesn't have a good secondary, and in that game he was targeted 9 times. He finished the game with 5 for 55, and then before that it was Minnesota, so he's gone up against some good backs there. This week, he's going to have the best matchup he's had in a month and a half, and I think that this could be a great spot for him because he should see plenty of action. They're getting away from Nelson Aguilar. We know he's a big red zone target. He's dirt cheap across the industry. You can pair him up with Wentz and Ertz and then max out everywhere else. I love that super stack.
All right, Devin, you're throwing up that red. Give us some of your stacks and tell us why no to DGB.
Yeah.
So I write up the game recaps for the Eagles every week, and both of Dorial Green Beckham's games were in losses. In wins, he's done significantly worse, and he didn't have a target against Atlanta in their most recent victory. He's a guy who it takes the right situation, and I think that they're going to be able to just run the ball all over this Green Bay Packers defense, even though that the Packers have been statistically good against the run. We saw what eventually these injuries are catching up to them, and we saw what Rob Kelly was able to do. I just don't think it's a game where they go 3 wide receivers that often. I think that they can dominate the game with Matthews and Aguilar and some Ertz in there as well. The one stack that I had last week that I mentioned that someone won a GPP with was Minnesota and Cordero Patterson. So just wanted to throw that out there and congratulate the individual who won a GPP. I didn't have the right combination with that stack. But looking at stacks this week, I think one of the most popular ones is going to be Tom Brady and Julian Edelman, as I mentioned before. The other stack that I'm looking at is Marcus Mariota and Rashard Matthews. So Rashard Matthews has caught 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games, and people are still not using him for whatever reason. He goes up against the Bears, and we know that the Bears are a dumpster fire. I think it's been mentioned multiple times here. But ultimately, he's a guy that they target inside the 20. He's a guy who gets looks inside the red zone. So he's a guy who's it's going to be sneaky. He'll be low owned, especially with Mariota, with all the other options. And then Carson Palmer's too cheap over on DraftKings at 5,300. So I like the Fitzgerald call with Michael Floyd potentially being out. Some of the other receivers are also in play. So I'll have a lot of Carson Palmer over there just because he is too cheap.
Stack them up, Dodds. And,
I obviously I won't go into them all, but there's a zillion Seattle stacks I like. I like some super stacks there as well. The stack I think that people are kind of missing. Greg Olsen is way underpriced this week as well. So if you're not going Jimmy Graham, the whole Cam Newton, Greg Olsen stack looks good. And Amari Cooper is another player we keep mentioning. Derek Carr, Amari Cooper makes sense. The combos that I think I'm going to run with that is I like Cam Newton, Greg Olsen, hoping for the shootout, Amari Cooper on the other side. And then the other side is Derek Cooper, Amari Cooper, and Greg Olsen trying to come back. So both of those being, Vegas has it a 49-point total. That becomes the shootout. Those are the 2 guys that I see having just tons of action. And that could be the kind of thing that vaults you into some big cashes. So those are the ones I'm going to run with. And then lots of Seattle combinations. Tyler Lockett's not a name we've mentioned much. He also gets a chance to obviously get return touchdowns. So in a situation that I already think, Doug, all the Seattle guys are too cheap, trying to fit Tyler Lockett in some of those lineups where a lot of other people won't have them might also make sense. So a lot of Seattle super stacks, and then I like that Oakland Carolina one.
Before we go any further, can I ask a question? Being outside most of the day, I saw Greg Olsen miss practice today. Does anybody know why he missed practice? Because I'm trying to look it up and I'm not finding it. And I think that's a pretty important thing for us leading into the weekend.
True. Yeah, I don't know.
I'm reading that it wasn't injury related, which is generally a good thing. But if it's illness related on Friday evening, that's concerning. So those of you who are listening tomorrow, definitely be aware of Greg Olsen and whatever his status is entering that Sunday matchup.
And if Greg Olsen was the scratch, put in Kelvin Benjamin, because that'll be all the offense at that point in a shootout.
Right. Pasquino, you get to wrap us up on stacks, baby. What you got?
Yeah, there was a lot of good stacks already mentioned. I like Carolina. I like the Oakland one, especially I'll mention Crabtree's questionable with an ankle issue, so I add a little bit more to Cooper. Since Devin mentioned a stack that he had last week, and I'll mention that I got some compliments for the one that I threw out there, the Dallas one, the Prescott to Dez, because again Baltimore's funneling things to the outside, and again that leads a lot of value back to a Cincinnati stack. I think that Boyd and Andy Dalton is a great stack this week. A lot of the good stacks we're taking. There's one stack I'll throw out there just as a wild card here, which is Jameis Winston. I think that there's a lot of possibility here that Tampa Bay could be throwing a lot. I think Great and also Mike Evans could have a good afternoon. It's obviously not a sure thing, but this is talking GPP. So I think that Winston makes for a good, very contrarian GPP this week.
Throw it out there and see what you get. As we wrap up the Week 12 edition of the Power Grid, we have to go over our parting thoughts. So is there any last bit of advice that you want to hammer home, Austin, this week?
I will mention one player that I didn't get a chance to mention, and that is tight end Gary Barnidge. I know we said a lot of terrible things about Cleveland, but Josh McCown's starting at quarterback. He has a good rapport with Barnidge, and the Giants have really struggled to cover the tight end. Plus 53% fantasy points to tight ends over the last 5 games. So Barnidge I like as a GPP tight end play. And happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, hope everyone continues to have a great holiday weekend. John, you're up with parting thoughts.
I don't really have a whole lot this week. Maybe I'll throw out just a tidbit that I talked with Austin the other night about. One player that I won't be on this weekend is Tyler Eifert against the Baltimore defense. Has already been pointed out. They've been stellar against tight end this year. they've been, I think they've given up the 4th least fantasy points to tight ends, and they've allowed 1 touchdown all season to tight ends. And that's where I'm going to throw it back to you guys. Austin's not allowed to answer, but who is the tight end that scored a touchdown against Baltimore this year?
Who was it?
Barnidge?
Seth the Valve.
No, Seth the Valve.
There you go. Princeton,
I project for him each
Princeton
week.
educated.
One catch, 9 yards.
Exactly.
Sometimes
So
21 touchdowns.
not a single player scored more than 10 fantasy points from the tight end position against Baltimore this weekend. So this year, excuse me. So Tyler Eifert is a complete fade for me, which again boosts that value for those guys like LaFell and Boyd playing at other positions.
If you need a tight end, get to the Ivy League. Pasquino, final thoughts for Week 12.
Yeah, if you want to, this is a week where it seems very chalky. Running back and some questions at wide receiver. I think, as Austin mentioned earlier, you can pay up and go down at running back just to be contrarian in GPP. It's a good way to do it. But I like to narrow down a list of 6 or 7 guys like at each position, and then based on tailoring it and where price points I'm going to be, that steers me to the guys that I like to actually be contrarian without being stupid. You're picking players that you're still on your list, but they just fit in a different way. So that's just one thing I wanted to point out.
All right, Dodds, your parting thoughts as we always.
I think the world's going to be on Ajayi, and everybody knows why. And like I said, the last 4 weeks, San Francisco's given 36.2 fantasy points, but not seen is just how bad San Francisco is in the passing game, because they're awful there too. So against wide receivers, they're giving up 41.4 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. So Devontae Parker heavily in my rotation as a guy to kind of throw in lineups and GPPs, because again, if Ajayi misses now, for a GPP, if you play Devontae Parker, don't play Ajayi. So in lineups that you don't have Ajayi as part of that GPP, throw in Devontae Parker as somebody who could potentially beat San Francisco badly deep as a good GPP play.
And Devin, we tie a bow on the show with you, not only with parting thoughts, but also some information about Hoops Guys.
Yeah, so I'll start with a parting thought of a player and then we'll get into Hoops Guys. Chris Ivory is a guy who no one is going to have. He's at 5,900 on FanDuel. TJ Yeldon is looking like he's going to miss this game.
Yes.
Buffalo has allowed the 10th most rushing yards to opposing running backs. He's a guy that I think is going to be sneaky. He led the AFC in rushing yards last year, so people forget about him. He went down to Jacksonville and people wrote him off. But this might be a spot where he could have a touchdown and 80 yards, which is really all he needs at 5,900 on FanDuel. Getting into Hoops Guys, this is the last weekend that we are free. So if you haven't had a chance to check us out, please do so. As starting on Monday, you will require a subscription for the website. And we're updating. If you see me looking off, it's because we're recording right before the games lock. And I want to make sure that our subscribers and followers have updated projections. There's been a lot of news tonight. And ultimately, we are monitoring these news 24 hours, not 24, but as close to 24 hours per day. We're not sleeping much, and we want to make sure that you have the most up to date news. We're adding articles every day. We have people requesting, hey, can you write something up for this? If you have a great idea, just let us know, and we'll be happy to. We have a team of 12 to 15 writers that are eager to write things up. So if you have an idea and you say, hey, I've been noticing this trend, can you guys do an analysis on it? Let us know. We'll be happy to do it. And ultimately, go check us out, hoopsguys.com.
That is hoopsguys.com for all of your fantasy basketball needs. He's Devin Knotts. He's fantastic. Jeff Pasquino loves kickers, and he's the man as well. Austin Lee is amazing, and John Lee is well, there's only one of a kind. Let me just say that about John Lee. And the dynamic David Dodds, a great jam-packed show. We appreciate everyone out there for watching, subscribing to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/footballguys, DOTCOM, subscribing to the Audible on iTunes. Many thanks. Couldn't do it without you. And we appreciate all of the love that we get on Twitter and social networking. Keep it up, and we'll keep it up on this end. For all of my fellas here, I'm your host, Cecil Lammy, saying thanks for watching. Stay tuned. Stay frosty.
I think this is my night.
Yeah.
Last night wasn't. Tonight's
Another
is
one.
the night.